Hello and welcome to today's Partner Web Conference. This is Fast Track Dynamics 365 for Finance and Operations Enterprise Edition Tech Talk. Today's topic, Performance Testing Approach. Presenting for us today from Microsoft, we have Senior R&D Solution Architect, Christopher Lim. So without any further delay, Christopher, over to you.
Thanks, Janice. All right, so let's get started. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. I'm going to present this tech talk on your performance testing approach. And for all the questions, as Janice mentioned, you can type those in the IM section. Davey Vliegen, a resolution architect from the Fast Track Dynamics 365 Finance and Operations team, will answer your questions. So let's talk about this specific tech talk and why we're doing this. We've noticed that many customers fall into the pitfall of not doing performance testing. Ultimately, they face issues post-go live and they enter in some escalations that become quite complex to manage. So with this tech talk, what we want to help you with is avoiding or at least limiting the risks of facing performance issues post-go live and all the consequences. We want to help you really build an adapted approach to performance testing based on the customer needs and the business goals. The idea is that we're going to leverage the experiences from actual implementations to provide you the right guidance. Performance testing is a large topic, and we're not going to cover some related content. We are not going to demonstrate in depth the tools. We're not going to cover the automated testing. We're not going to cover the stress testing methodology. But at the end, we're going to provide some links to resources that you can consult to go deeper in those areas. Also, our idea is to continue this series of tech talks on performance testing to cover more specific points such as the tooling and the how to investigate issues. If you have any suggestion, feel free to submit that at the end of this tech talk. Now, let's review what is performance testing in a nutshell. We're going to cover 4 main questions, those pillars, which are basically why you would do performance testing, what scenarios you would consider and cover, where you would do your performance testing, and when during the implementation you would consider performance testing, and performance in general. Let's start with the why. So, think of those typical scenarios. So a manufacturer is going to build a car. He would not test that. If he was not testing it at maximum speed, he would be worried. Similarly, with an elevator, if it was not tested with the maximum load, he would be worried, right? In the software industry, it's similar and it's quite common to do performance testing. Those 3 examples, they basically cover one scenario for performance testing, which is the maximum load. It's quite common to do it, but it's not the only one to consider when you're implementing Dynamics 365 Finance and Operations. Ultimately, the point is that the performance testing will ensure your system, your solution, is scalable. It's going to help you identify and investigate performance issues early in the project. It's going to help you also identify optimization points so that you deliver the maximum value to the business. And it gives the assurance that the solution you have built will enable the customer to achieve his business goals. Another aspect is that you can then also simulate a projection of business goals. That could be, for example, the number of transactions you want to achieve in 2 or 3 years, an additional chunk of end users using the system, etc. Now, to be clear, when you're building your solution, you're actually adding building blocks on top of our platform. So when there is a performance issue, the root cause can come from different areas. It's what you can see on the screen. It can come from actually the business operations, the end users, the analytics and reporting, integration, customizations, data, and so on. Microsoft is committed to deliver a scalable platform to handle your business load. This can be visible in the standard solution that we provide and the underlying infrastructure, which is basically servers and database. The reality is that when there's a performance issue, there's also other components that can break this scalability. A good example is with a device that would use an obsolete version of a browser. Right here, in the business operations, there's this common example where by changing the business habits, you can gain performance on the solution itself. I had one situation where basically the customer was importing the products during the day, and it was not necessary. So by just moving this batch job to the night, they gain efficiency, they saved resources, and the overall system was a lot more efficient during the business hours. Similarly, if a customization is not adapting the right patterns for optimal performance, this could lead to performance issues. So Microsoft is committed to provide a scalable platform, but it is still the responsibility of the implementation team to ensure that this scalability is not broken. Now, let's cover a bit more the different scenarios. You should always start with the business goals in mind, meaning the target number of customers, target number of sales, target number of stores, and projected over the years. What you want to ensure is that you know what will be the targets for the business. From there, you will be able to identify the right performance testing scenarios. The key user activities, it could be the creation of the sales orders, the batch processes, it could be the invoicing, for example, the integration, and any exchanges with external applications, and the analytics and reporting. What's very important is that you always make sure to have measured goals with exit criteria. And the last point is that we've seen many projects being very successful in performance testing by doing the day in the life scenario, which is basically the concurrent workloads that would happen post-go live that you want to simulate in your performance testing environment. You take the peak hour, you see what would happen during this peak hour, what the users would do, what integration would be on, what would be the batch jobs executed, and you just confirm that all of them working together and at the same time is just fine. Once you have your scenarios, you can then determine what are the different preparation activities. For example, if you need to prepare some simulation data and use DMF, for example, for that. Now, let's cover a bit more the different types of scenarios with some examples. So interactive scenarios, it's basically everything that happens on the user interface on the web client. For those performance testing scenarios that are interactive, it could simply be because they are critical to the business. I mentioned the sales order creation, and this is actually a very common one. If you have 1,000 users entering sales orders at the same time, you may want to test that and do a stress test. It could be also an interactive action that is going to process a large number of lines. This is the case, for example, with the payment proposal, which is natively done for a small number of lines. If you had that for more lines, you would like to validate that the response time is still fine for you. There could be also situations where the end users are customizing the workspaces with additional tiles. As a tile is linked to a query, if the query is complex and performance costly, it can bring performance issues, right? For batch scenarios, there are multiple aspects to it, but the main thing is really when you have a heavy batch job processing massive volumes. It's the most common scenario we've seen. The idea is really that during the performance testing, you're not validating the maximum load. If you have 1 million line, you're not going to validate that on your non-production environment, but you're going to establish its scalability. You're going to process 10 records, 100 records, 1,000 records, 10,000 records, and you're going to confirm that the duration and the throughput remain constant, that they don't drop significantly. It's a pattern that you can see, for example, with the cart management, which is not a batch, but to give you the idea, the cart management is made in a way that when you're adding a line, it's going to be super performant. When you're adding a second line, it's going to check the previous line to establish the price. So as you add more lines, the costs and the performance is actually decreasing. That's the kind of behavior you want to identify and correct if needed. On integration, that is actually a very important aspect. The first thing is that whenever you can, you should test with the maximum load for your messages when it's possible. The idea is that the day you have actually the maximum size, you know it's going to work just fine. The other aspect is if you're using real-time interfaces, meaning that in your business process, application A is calling Dynamics 365 Finance Operations, expects an answer before continuing the process. In such cases, it's very important to know what is the response time, determine if it's just fine, and if there's nothing to improve in the network, in the code, anything like that. The other issues that we have detected is the overuse of OData, meaning that OData would be used for anything and everything, and that there would not be any consideration even for the large volumes. OData is not made natively to handle large volumes, so in such cases, the data management framework, or DMF, is actually more efficient. So by doing the performance testing on the integration, you would determine if actually you have the right and most efficient approach. And similarly, for reporting and analytics, I will take again the example of OData. We've seen customers using Power BI reports that leverage extensively the OData connector to get information from Dynamics 365 Finance and Operations. This is not right for large volumes, again. And in such cases, changing the approach, going through the entity store, going through bring your own database, are actually better choices to have optimal performances. For example, with OData, the servers are going to be hit, so it's going to affect the transactional processing. If it goes through the entity store, this is a separate database that is actually synchronized using the secondary replica, secondary node. So the impact on the transactional processing on the ERP is very limited. So performance testing can help you detect if you have also the right patterns and the right design overall. Finally, I mentioned it, day in the life. So it's really about simulating the tasks, the activities, as they would happen during the working hours post go live. And again, what you would do is taking the peak hour, you determine what's going to happen during that peak hour, what my users are going to do, what interfaces would be turned on, what would be the batch jobs that would be executed, analytics and reporting, and you do all of that at the same time. If you have the information, you know that post-go live, the normal days should be just fine. And this is a very common scenario that is often forgotten. Now, as I mentioned, those testing scenarios, they need preparation most of the time. It starts with collecting the different critical scenarios, prioritizing them, listing the exit criteria and the targets. But it's also all the preparation in terms of data expansion, simulation data that you generate, and the tests themselves. So do make sure that you write and track all the preparation activities. The other aspect is that as you're defining the targets, do make sure to have an ideal target and a maximum acceptable target. Because if you have none, you could actually fine-tune forever and forever, endlessly. So it's very important to set the right boundaries so that as you get the results, you know where you should focus your attention to fine-tune the solution. Now, let's talk about where you will do the performance testing. So, in essence, the tiers differ in the number of available threads. Let's put it very, very simply. An environment, it's the combination of compute in the EOS and database processing in Azure SQL. The threads are basically handling the tasks in the system, whether they are interactive, integration, batch, or even day in the life. An environment has a tier, and the tier provide a maximum number of threads, depending on the computing and database processing capacities. So ultimately, the rule is the higher the tier, the higher the number of threads. Where it becomes an issue is when you're doing the day in the life, which is going to solicitate the maximum number of threads. It could be that for a small customer, a tier 2 is just fine to do this day in the life scenario. But for larger implementation, the environment, the tier 2 environment, would just be maxed out fairly quickly. So it is very important that you rely on your partner to select, determine what is the best tier for performance testing. In some cases, tier 2 would just work for small customers, as I mentioned. In larger implementations, a tier 5 may be mandatory. One thing to keep in mind is that those performance testing environments, usually you don't need them for a year. So there's a way actually to get and subscribe on a monthly basis. If you have an enterprise agreement for your Dynamics 365 Finance and Operation licenses, you can go through the MPSA to get an add-on tier 4, add-on tier 5 environment on a monthly basis. And if it's through the CSP engagement, it's already based on a monthly basis. One issue to avoid is the use of tier 1 environments for performance testing. The tier 1 environments, they have a different topology than production. The best example is that they have SQL Server and they have local disks, which means that any test you would do would actually be irrelevant. So avoid doing that and make sure to have the right environment for performance testing. There's a set of tools that we provide in standard that you would use when preparing and when doing the performance testing. Do make sure to be more comfortable with them. At the end of this tech talk, we're going to provide some links, and as I mentioned, the idea would be that we cover them in more detail in another session. It could be the tools that would allow you to do an initial investigation. It could be with the RCS environment monitoring to visualize the activities history, the key performance counters of the environment, and see the logs and telemetry data, such as the slow queries. It could be the trace parser to actually see what's going on at the code and database level. And it could be also the Perf SDK to do this stress test and simulate the concurrent users. And now let's cover the when. When would you consider performance and when would you do performance testing? In a project, you have your timeline. This is a waterfall model, right? What you need to keep in mind is that performance is actually not just right here in the test. It's not just about performance testing. Performance should be considered throughout the implementation. We've seen successful teams that have that aspect of the solution in mind at the very beginning, and this helps them drive performance throughout the project and inside the core design. A good example is that when they're capturing the functional and non-functional requirements, there's a strong focus on performance. They will ask if this is a batch job that should be run in a specific time window. They will follow up and make sure that any interface that is real-time is flagged as critical for performance testing. Ultimately, they will know where they need to focus their attention so that in the design phase, when they're building the solution, there's the best and the most efficient patterns in place. Similarly, they're educating the testers, however it's in the functional testing, system integration testing, or UAT, and they're going to make sure that if the tester identifies a slow form and it's recurrent, it happens once that the form is taking a minute to load. They try again, it happens again. They try again, it happens again. At this moment, they know that they need to open a defect and that this should be investigated. So performance is not just in performance testing, it's also in the other phases for testing. Ultimately, when they have the production environment, they will also try to do the maximum workload. It's something that we authorize and encourage in Dynamics 365 Finance and Operations, because you will be able to use the point-in-time restore functionality to basically go back to a clean state in production after you have done your testing. So with those simple steps, they basically ensure that they have the best performance for the solution and ultimately for the business. And the key point here is that performance testing is one part, but performance should be considered throughout the implementation. I talked briefly about production. What you need to know is that Microsoft will do its utmost to size properly production. But the two key inputs are basically the usage profile, where you describe your peak hour and peak transaction volumes, but also this performance testing telemetry data. We're going to use those two aspects, how you describe your business and its volumes, what we could see during your testing, to size properly production and allow you, as I mentioned at before go live during the mock cutover, to do the simulation and confirm that everything is working fine. The performance testing can never happen in production. I just mentioned it, but what you would do is a final round of validation. Performance testing should happen in a non-production environment, for the simple reason that production it's not a non-production environment. If you're doing that performance testing in production, it's already too late. If you detect an issue, you won't have time to fix it already. And the thing is that if you were detecting an issue, it would be very difficult to investigate. And as you get live, you would have to stop, basically. So that's why you should always consider a non-production environment for performance testing. And again, you would rely on your partner to do that selection. Other things to consider. So, the first thing is the responsibilities. There is often a confusion about the responsibilities in case of performance issues. Microsoft is really committed, as I mentioned, to deliver a platform that is scalable. We're going to leverage the customer usage profile, the telemetry data, and do the proper sizing. If there were any performance issue in the infrastructure or in the standard solution, we would definitely deliver a solution. It could be a hotfix, it could be within the infrastructure, on the database. However, as we saw, there are many other building blocks that the project team is building that could disrupt the scalability and that could cause performance issues. So that is why it's very important for you to keep in mind that the customer knows the business goals. They should also try to optimize the business operations as much as possible. It could be the example I provided with the product imports that happen during the day and that are now put overnight to optimize the resources. It's also just planning the performance testing and allocating the right resources. For the partner who is building the solution, it's making sure that there's a clear understanding of the customer processes, and especially the ones that are critical. Making sure that all the non-functional requirements are captured and that the solution that is built takes those into account, and that the implemented solution doesn't disrupt the scalability of the administrative finance and operations. And during performance testing, it's about having the partner providing the expertise to educate the customer and supporting them for the execution and the delivery. With those responsibilities in mind, you can be sure that you will know how to plan carefully your performance testing and get the proper assistance from Microsoft. Now, do make sure to apply the latest platform updates and critical hotfixes because they do bring significant performance improvements. We've seen it, for example, in PU12, where a mechanism was introduced to clear the cache from the browser. So multiple customers were positively impacted by that. Define the workflow pre and post go live for handling any performance issue. Who would triage? Who would investigate? Who would open the ticket if needed, etc. If you know, and if everyone knows what they have to do, the whole processing will be a lot smoother. Also, if you have any ASV solutions embedded, do make sure that they are aware that you're going to do performance testing so that they can provide you the best and most reactive support if there is an issue in their solution, because that could happen. And when you're opening a ticket with Microsoft support, be efficient, provide the maximum level of details. And don't expect Microsoft to resolve all the performance issues. For example, if the configuration is incorrect, we've seen that where there is a misunderstanding with the number sequences that are set to continuous. So all number sequences are set to continuous. This actually creates a performance issue. because the rule should be only when needed. The number sequences should be set as continuous. So incorrect configuration can heavily impact the performance of your solution. The other aspects in efficient business processes, Microsoft cannot fix that. And same thing for any customizations that would not be efficient. And so just to give you some tips regarding the Microsoft support, to be efficient and avoid additional emails, additional calls, when you're opening issues related to performance, what you should provide is rather simple. It's what you're trying to achieve, the reproduction steps, the expected result, the actual result, the result of your pre-investigation, what you detected, what you suspect, and a trace of the performance issue if it's applicable. The more information you provide, the faster the investigation will be. And when another level, so a level 2 engineer gets involved, he can get quickly an overview of the situation and go faster. So this is a very brief recap, a checklist for you to determine if you are on the right track for performance of your solution. Do make sure to follow up if in any of those questions it's a no. And by the way, you will get the slides. It will be possible to download those directly on Infopedia, and it will be a PDF format, but that should be just fine for you. Now, what I want you to do is to meet our two project teams. It's a bit caricatural, but it's actually a combination of things we've seen in the field. On the left side, you have Slow IT. It's a project team that considers the solution should be performant and scalable by nature, and Microsoft to ensure that the implemented solution is scalable. So they don't really see the value and the necessity of performance testing. On the right side, it's Fast IT. They have watched this tech talk, they have questioned themselves, but they understand that Microsoft is providing a standard solution that is scalable, but that any additional building block, configuration and customization could disrupt this scalability. Let's see how they do during the implementation. During the analysis phase, Slow IT doesn't capture the non-functional requirement for performance. They don't really try to identify any critical scenario that would be candidate for performance testing. As a matter of fact, they are not planning performance testing, just UAT. So they don't even consider having a specific environment for that. Fast IT, on the other hand, they want to educate the project team and make them aware of performance, whether it's during the non-functional requirements gathering or how to detect and erase performance issues during the testing. They also want to define very quickly what would be the right environment for performance testing, and they make sure that they allocate the time and the planning for that, for the performance testing. In the design phase, Slow IT, they focus on the functional designs to make sure that the solution is fit for purpose, and they don't really consider any performance aspects or best practices. For example, the business operations calendar that I mentioned, where you're going to put any non-critical jobs in the night. So they adopt inefficient patterns in their designs and at all levels. They go with mono-threaded approach where it's a heavy batch job. They have the Power BI reports using OData. They use OData for any type of integration whatsoever. Fast IT, on the other hand, they design an overall architecture that focuses on the business performance. So they adopt specific patterns, specific practice in their underlying designs that are proven to be efficient, like the use of set-based operations. Also, they detect that one or two developers are not so keen, not so knowledgeable on performance, so they send them to the advanced performance workshop, and they define workflows to investigate efficiently the issues. So they kind of prepare themselves for the worst. During the development phase, the project team, the Slow IT project team, they develop customizations without knowing if they are performant or not. Basically, they just implement the bad patterns that we saw in the design phase. They don't also include the latest platform or binary updates. They just want to wait for go live, and then when it's stabilized, they will think about adding those. Fast IT, they define the additional flow and guidelines to open support tickets efficiently, whether it's with Microsoft or their ISV. They plan training specifically on the tools and based on the roles. For example, the administrator would know how to use the environment monitoring via LCS, and they perform the unit test with focus on the maximum load whenever it's possible. So they want to test as much as possible. And ultimately, they want to use the latest platform binary updates and critical binary hotfixes to go with the most performant version. During the testing phase, Slow IT, they focus on UAT, and they don't identify any performance issue. So the solution works and the business can use it to operate, but there's no focus on performance whatsoever. Fast IT, they already identified during performance testing 10 issues, including 4 critical, a user interaction, the form is hanging and then crashing, and this comes from the ISV solution. They see an interface that is broken, and basically the messages are queuing. There is a Power BI report that is not loading, and they have a heavy batch job that is taking days instead of hours. So they start and activate their workflow. They work with the relevant party. They do the prior investigation, and they open the incidents to get a solution. They receive and they apply that solution. Now, during the deployment phase, Slow IT is going to perform the mock cutover and just validate that the team is ready for go live. Fast IT, they will do the mock cutover, but on top of that, they will try with the maximum workload and confirm the overall speed in production. They know now that when it's going to happen, post go live, it's going to take this amount of time, and there won't be an issue. If needed, they report any last-minute issues to the relevant parties, and they determine the support process post-go-live because the team could change. Now they have validated they are fully ready. At go-live, what happens. Slow IT is now discovering, as they use the system, that there are 10 performance issues, and including 4 critical. They request in emergency a tier 5 environment to investigate performance issues, but what they didn't know is that there's a lead time to get the environment ready and in place. Fast IT, they have limited risks of facing performance issues because they have already detected and resolved them before go live. So if there were actually any performance issue, they have the tools, they have the processes, they have the actors in place to investigate and fix efficiently. So after go live, what's the situation? Slow IT, and this is actually quite concrete because I have seen it in many of my escalations. They suffer first from the image that they have done a very poor application. Now they're, for each critical issue, in escalation with the party. They're in escalation with the ASV to get very quickly a solution. They're in an escalation with the external application that is integrated with Dynamics 365 Finance Operations. There is an escalation with Microsoft, for example, with the Power BI connectors. There is an escalation with the partner to rework on the batch job. And all of the remaining issues, the 6 others, they have been deprioritized, and still they generate frustration with the end users. The team, the Fast IT team that considered performance from beginning to end, they have actually limited risks of facing performance issues. And once again, if issues were to happen, they have everything in place to investigate and fix. So now the central question is really for you. What is your approach to performance testing now, after we have covered those different questions? Are you slow IT or fast IT? There are here additional resources that you can look at. Again, you will have the PDF directly on Infopedia to get the links. And with this, we're now going to the questions and answers. So hopefully Davy could process most of your questions directly through the IM. I will have a quick look at the other questions. So I think we have 2 main questions. Where can I track current system performance in LCS? Also, is there a way to look at previous performance in the system? We have experienced significant slowdowns recently. So you can find this information in the LCS environment monitoring, and more information can be found directly in the docs platform if you look for the monitoring diagnostics article for LCS. So you will be able to find real-time and historical performance-related information. One additional thing is that we have a YouTube video. It's basically a quick guide on our channel that will show you how to use the environment monitoring. The other question is, can we use Perfmon or extra tools on tier 2 or higher environments? On tier 1, we don't have admin permissions, so we cannot use those specific tools. So it's a very good question. At this moment, on tier 2 and higher, you can still use them. You can still RDP into the environment, but this is going to change. We're going to lock down similarly to tier 1. And the idea will be to get all the Perfmon related information directly in LCS, in the environment monitoring. I have another question on LCS monitoring for on-premises environment. I'm focused on the cloud actually, so would not have the answer right now. So this one will take offline. I will need to validate first within our team. Okay. So this is basically the end of this session. Thank you very much for your time. As Janice mentioned, we're really into feedback. So do make sure to let us know what you thought about this session. And if you have any additional subjects you are thinking about that we should cover. One last word. Do watch or share this tech talk to make sure that you consider performance testing and performance in general throughout your implementation. This is really key to make sure that the customer can operate successfully. And with that, Janice, it's back to you.
All right, thank you, Christopher. All right, ladies and gentlemen, as Christopher mentioned, we do like feedback. So you're going to notice a URL on the left-hand side of your screen. That's the link to a short survey for this web conference, and we ask that you please take a moment before logging out to access it. We hope that you found today's information helpful, and if you enjoyed today's web conference, have feedback on how we can provide you with a better event, or you would like to submit topics for future web conferences, this is your chance to let us know. The survey scores are on a scale from 1 to 5, with 5 being the highest score possible. And that is going to conclude today's web conference. Attendees can access the web conference recording by the same registration link used to attend today's live broadcast. I'd like to extend a big thank you to our presenter Christopher and our Q&A support, Davey and Martin, and thank you, audience, for logging in and joining us today.